Good evening, everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome to Office Hours. I'm Kamara Toffolo. For those of you joining for the first time, I am a resume writer, LinkedIn consultant, job search strategist, and a LinkedIn top voice, and I help established professionals dare to do work differently and land great fitting gigs. And I'm super excited for our topic tonight and our guest. Julie Turney is joining us, and I was lucky enough to be interviewed by Julie on her podcast, HR Sound Off. So that was a lot of fun. Now we're turning the tables, and Julie is an HR influencer with over 15 years of experience in HR. She works with leadership to create people-first cultures, as well as she is a coach, and she works with HR professionals. And Julie has firsthand insight into neurodiversity, which is one of the big topics that we're going to be covering tonight. So really, really excited. And please do welcome Julie Turney to the stream tonight. Hello, Julie. How are you doing?
Hi, Kamara. I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. I'm so happy and really thrilled to have you joining me tonight. And really excited for our topics, which I think are just so important.
Yes.
And just something that I think that you can offer a lot of insights to job seekers, and especially around well-being, which is something we're going to dig into in a bit. Mm-hmm. And that will be super valuable to them. But before we jump into our questions, I do want to check in with our audience to see where everybody is tuning in from. So we have a bit of a global audience on Office Hours, and so would love to see in the chat and the comments where everybody's coming in from. Hello, Michael from Calgary. Thanks for joining. And Julie, yourself, you're in Barbados, right?
Yes, I am.
How's the weather?
Oh, well, we haven't been doing too bad, but we've been affected by the volcano in St. Vincent, so it's been very ashy and very cloudy. This time of the year, we normally get a lot of Sahara dust anyway. So the volcanic ash has just added to that. It's been crazy.
Oh boy. Is it blocking out the sun or?
So initially it was like the first 2 days, it was blocking out the sun. And so day looked just like night, and it was almost quite confusing. But it's just ash everywhere, and we're slowly recovering from it now because it's kind of eased up a bit. But yeah. But
everybody's keeping well.
We're doing our best. Good.
Good to hear. So I'd love to dig into our topics tonight. So first up is really neurodiversity, and you have firsthand insight into neurodiversity, being a neurodiverse job seeker. Would you be able to share with the audience your own experience as a neurodiverse job seeker?
Sure, yeah. So I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was about 6 years old, I think it was. And so for me, having searched for jobs has always been a challenge. And then finding jobs and keeping jobs can have their own challenges as well, because having ADHD means that my attention is I'm not always 100% driven by whatever I'm doing. So like once I've got the hang of a job, it gets very boring for me and very monotonous. And so I've always had to find things that keep me going all the time. And also I've had challenges with communication. So being an introvert with ADHD comes with its own set of challenges in terms of socialization and communication. Those are things that I struggled with for a very long time, but then getting help and support through coaches, therapists has helped me a lot with how I manage my ADHD and also how I manage my work and on a daily basis. So I spent 15 years working in a corporate space in HR. I started my career in sales, and I realized I didn't like sales, but quickly moved into administration to start from the ground up, and then slowly moved into HR. And so I spent 15 years in HR, and now I'm on my own. And that has its own challenges. Being an entrepreneur with ADHD has its own challenges as well, because sometimes I can go off on tangents all day. I'm doing one thing that I'm supposed to do. So that in itself has its own challenges. But yeah, I know who I am, and I declare that up front. I'm not afraid to say who I am and what's going on with me. And I've always been transparent that way when I'm being employed, and even with clients. Like sometimes, I would declare and say, you might have to reel me back in when I go on this tangent with you about this particular thing. So yeah, it comes with its challenges, but it also is a blessing, because for me, with being someone who has ADHD, it's very easy for me to get focused on things that I really like and explore and experiment. It's very easy for me to be creative and innovative, and especially now being on my own, doing my own thing, like the things that I come up with, sometimes I wonder, but it's a delicate balance. It's a delicate balance.
And I think, speaking of the strengths that come with having ADHD, I believe when I was on your podcast, you mentioned that you got into podcasting because of your unique strengths. Is that right?
That's right. Because I wanted to create a platform where I was able to demystify the many misconceptions that people have about HR. And for a long time, I'd been exploring different ways of doing that, whether it be by LinkedIn Live or by Instagram Live or whatever. And then I figured, you know what? The best and safest place for me would be on a podcast, because then people can't see me. They can't see when I'm not being focused, but they can still hear me. They can hear the conversations, because my eyes tend to wander. And then I remember once doing a live, like a couple of times I did some videos on LinkedIn, and I got some messages back. They were like, "Why do your eyes keep twitching, like moving here, there?"
Oh, no.
It was like, that's because my ability to focus, sometimes I struggle with that, and my eye moves or pivots to different things that are going on in the background, but I'm still able to have that conversation.
Yeah.
But I do have, that's a challenge for me. So someone called me out on it on LinkedIn.
Well, first of all, that's not very nice, but
it is what it is.
But I also experienced that as well. And because I'm watching the chat coming in, and then watching you, and then looking at the notes that I have. So it's for anybody. It can be live, can be intimidating. And, but I loved being on your show live.
Thank you.
I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's awesome, and it's so great to have you here tonight, and continue to have our conversation. So I really appreciate you also sharing your own personal story about your own job search. So before our chat, as I was preparing for our discussion tonight, I was looking at statistics of unemployment rates amongst the neurodiverse population. Harvard Business Review mentioned it could be as high as 80% unemployment. That is incredibly high. Why do you think it's just so high?
Neurodiversity is one of those things that people will always struggle to interact with. And a lot of times when you think about a person who has a neurodiversity, and maybe we break it down a little bit, you're thinking about persons who have autism, they're on that spectrum, they may have Asperger's, they may have Tourette's, ADHD like me, or they may be dyslexic. And interacting with a person who is neurotypical can have its challenges for us as neurodivergent people, but it also is a struggle for people to interact with us, because then you wonder why we're not normal, like why we're not interacting like you want us to. And the interview and the job seeking process is all about socialization and communication. And those are things that we as people who are neurodivergent struggle with. Most of the times people stereotypically would think of us as maybe like Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory.
I love Sheldon.
Sheldon. Or you might think of the guy from The Good Doctor.
Right. Yep.
So when you see these things on TV, they bring awareness. Every single person who is neurodivergent is not necessarily like a Sheldon or
Right.
like our good doctor, because we all have different types of neurodivergence. So, and I just love that word, divergent, but neurodivergence.
Is it neurodiverse? Sorry to cut you off. Is it neurodivergent, neurodiverse? I want to make sure I'm using the proper term.
So neurodivergent.
Neurodivergent.
Yes.
Okay. Got it. The divergent being a different way of thinking, a different way of processing.
Just the way we think and process things, the way we see the world is different. And that study that you were talking about from the Harvard Business Review mainly speaks a lot about, and most studies do talk about people with autism. Generally, they don't holistically focus on all of the different facets of what a person could be if they are neurodivergent. And the main struggle comes with persons who will sit in the autistic spectrum. That's where that high number comes. When you think about persons who have Tourette's, ADHD, dyslexia, and so on, these people also sit in a similar space. And funny enough, people who are neurodivergent struggle more with being employed than people with disabilities.
Oh, really? Why is that?
So studies show, because generally neurotypical people just do not struggle with interacting with neurodivergent people. That's the number one reason. Because when we come into your space, whether it's for an interview or even as we've gone through the interview process and we got the job, just the way we socialize is different. The way we communicate is different. And so going through that interview process, you will see a person who has, let's say, the autism on that spectrum will struggle more because they just struggle with interacting with people in general. And so things like not reading from notes, you'll find that they read from notes to answer questions, or the way you structure questions would have to change. But that comes with the person declaring or feeling the comfort to declare that they are neurodivergent.
And speaking of that comfort in that declaration, do you feel that every professional who is, or every job seeker professional who is neurodivergent should feel that they can declare that?
You should feel comfortable enough to declare it. Especially if you want to start the relationship with an employer on the right foot. If you're honest and open about it up front, I think that sets the ground for the start of a good relationship, and at least the employer knows you put the employer in a position to be able to either restructure the questions that they have to find a way to make the work environment more comfortable for you if you declare it. If you don't, then you'll struggle more because you haven't given your employer the opportunity to sensitize themselves and to help you be more comfortable in the workplace instead of being the odd person out and feeling more challenged. If you declare it, it helps with enhancing the relationship or creating a better relationship. Now, I know there's a struggle with, okay, but there's a reverse of this where I could declare and then it could be held against me. Biases could be created, and then I may not get the job. Yes, that's also true. But then if you focus on the fact that you're giving the employer the opportunity to create a safe space for you, then to open up makes more sense.
I love that. And I guess there's value, there's a lot of value in being transparent about it, because if there is bias, like at a corporate culture level, let's say, maybe there's benefit of how do I say this? Almost like removing yourself from that bias before you're in a job.
Yes.
Is that when you were jobs searching, what did you look out for when you were interviewing to make sure that the corporate culture would be inclusive?
So sometimes on an interview, that opportunity to ask that question, do you have any questions for us? And I say, okay, as someone who suffers with neurodiversity, could you tell me what the environment is like? Like, what support do you put in place for people with like ADHD? Because
right.
that I have ADHD. And I put that question out there up front. So they go, okay, we know what to expect. And it's a learning curve for a lot of people, a lot of managers and a lot of HR professionals, recruiters. It's a learning curve. It's something that you're going to have to stick in as one of your learning and development practices for yourself as a professional, that you may come across someone who is neurodivergent and you're going to have to interact with them differently.
That's great to know. That it sounds like kind of there's a shift towards being more aware of the diversity of your applicants and your candidate pool. So that gives me hope.
There are actually companies that are neurodivergent friendly or are focused that way. So you think of companies like Microsoft, LinkedIn. These are companies, SAP. These are all companies that are neurodivergent friendly, and they focus on hiring specifically employees who are neurodivergent. And it sets the tone for what we can expect going forward in other companies.
So how would job seekers seek out those neurodivergent, neurodiverse friendly organizations?
Research. You got to do your research, but there are also great organizations that are specifically tailored to help persons with neurodiversities. So two that I could think of is Integrate, which is the Autism Employment Advisors.
Okay.
They specifically work with persons who are autistic or on that spectrum to find employment. And they actually work with neurodivergent partners, corporate partners, to put these people in jobs. And then you have, there's Patton, I think it's Patton and St. Joseph.
Okay.
They also have a center for autism education. And they work specifically with organizations to teach managers and HR professionals how to work with employees, or even going through the candidate process with persons who may have a neurodivergence. So they train you on how to identify it, because there are some ways that you can identify an applicant who has a neurodivergence up front. And then they also help you to find ways to create safe spaces within the workplace for employees who are neurodivergent, who may declare it later down the road, because there are some people who may find out about it later down and then declare it in the job.
I see. You're meaning there may be some job seekers or applicants who find that out about themselves later down the road?
The road. Yes, that's quite possible.
Okay. Oh, that's something I hadn't thought of. So that's good to know. So with being transparent, if you are neurodivergent, so mentioning it maybe in the interview, but what about your actual application? Would you recommend mentioning it in, say, a cover letter?
That's a good question. I've actually never thought about it, but it may not be a bad idea. As you say, talk a little bit about yourself, or maybe somewhere in your value proposition, because like I said, there are many benefits to having an employee who is neurodivergent. As a matter of fact, studies show that if you have employees who are neurodivergent, your organization tends to do better than organizations that don't, because persons who are neurodivergent are more creative and more innovative. It's just how we interpret the world, how we speak and communicate, and how we socialize. But work-wise, persons who are neurodivergent are going to follow the rules. They're going to be more honest and upfront. They will be on time. They will never be late. They're very detail oriented, very focused once they're into their work. And so these are huge benefits. And it's shown that most organizations who hire neurodivergent employees not only do better than people who don't, they usually have a 26% increase in revenue as a result.
Really? Oh, wow. That's that makes a very strong case for hiring neurodivergent professionals. Wow. That's incredible. That's incredible. I'm super excited to hear that stat. So that's fantastic. I just want to pop into the chat and just remind everyone, if you do have any questions, to please do put them into the chat on YouTube or in the comments on LinkedIn, and we'll definitely get to them. So that's fantastic. So maybe we should now talk about overall well-being, because I know that's a topic that's very close to your heart.
Yes.
So how can job seekers really take care of themselves during like long job searches?
Yeah, the job search can get really, really difficult and intense, especially if you're searching for a job for like a year or more. So there are a couple things that you can do, and I would say I'll give you maybe just a few. So I would say limit your job hunting time. So
Okay.
like, schedule times that you're going to job hunt during the day. Maybe you say, I'm going to job hunt maybe at least 1 to 3 hours during the day. I'll spend that focusing on job hunting. And then the next thing you want to do is give yourself a win every single day. And what I mean by that is, so after you finish your job hunting, you could do something like go on a webinar, learn something more, or learn something new, or learn a new recipe. And there are so many. I recently, and I'm not ashamed to say it, I recently discovered TikTok.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
so many, so many recipes that I've experimented with on TikTok. But one of the things that I really love about TikTok is they have some really great mindfulness. People who do like mindfulness exercises. There's the Calm app actually has a TikTok account, and they actually do some really cool stuff within their account. So
that's great.
To find a way to just like take a few moments and do some of the meditation exercises or mindfulness exercises that they have on that app. But there's really cool people on TikTok as well that are sharing mindfulness exercises as well. And then I would say pay attention to your surroundings. You don't want to be sitting at your computer all day long searching for jobs. It gets monotonous. It can also cause depression over time. And so to kind of blank that out, kind of jazz up your space a bit. So you could put on some music during your job search, like a scented candle, or use the aroma therapy on some stones. And I would say also face the light. So whenever you're working, always position yourself to face light. So even if you live in a city or you live in an apartment complex and you don't have a nice view, at least face the light, so that helps you be more a part of nature. Once, studies show once you face light or the sun, it helps you to feel at one with nature. That helps to release endorphins and serotonin. So try that. And then I would say give yourself something to look forward to. So like after you've gone through that job search for the whole week and you've had your highs and lows, give yourself something to look forward to. So kind of like schedule maybe like a hike. If you can go outside and you can see a family member, go visit a family member, or bake something and just say like, I'm looking forward to eating this, or going for this ice cream, or going for this meal. Give yourself something to look forward to. And those are some of the ways that I would recommend that you use to kind of like help your mental health as you're going through the job search.
I love that. So it sounds really like it's about rewarding yourself for sticking to it, and also really that aspect of self-care really comes into it. Like if you run out of steam, no one's going to do your job search for you. So it's so important to prioritize yourself and your well-being and your mental health as you're job searching. And I'm curious to hear from the audience. How are you guys doing in your job searches? Are you feeling that it's really like going on and on and on, and it's quite lengthy? Are you running out of steam, or do you have the energy to keep going? Let us know, and let us know what your secrets are for keeping going. So that's fantastic. I love all those tips. And it's funny. So you just discovered TikTok not long ago. Yeah.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah. Are you creating TikTok videos yourself?
I am not as yet, but I think the main reason why I went on TikTok is because I'm doing an experiment right now where I'm trying to figure out like how people are perceiving HR on different social media platforms.
Okay.
And so I've now gotten to TikTok, and it's been interesting seeing how HR perceives itself, but then also how others perceive HR. And I'm right now, it's just kind of like I'm in a study phase.
Right. Yeah, I just am a lurker on TikTok. I don't make any TikTok videos. And I've come across some interesting stuff that something that especially on the job search side of things on TikTok, there are a lot of people who don't understand job search giving tips. I don't know if
I've seen a lot of those. I think there was one that made it to LinkedIn that I saw. And that was also part of the curiosity for me heading on to TikTok, where this lady was giving resume advice, and she was saying, like, if you have like one of those names like Shaquanda or whatever, but you have a nice middle name, use your middle name to get through the door, and then show people who Shaquanda really is. And I thought I was kind of horrified by that. I thought that was terrible advice.
I think the majority of us were quite aghast, but with that, it was like where did you come up with that, and why would you advise someone to do that?
We're talking about being transparent. Like, if that's your name, that's your name.
Yeah.
And people are either they're gonna say your name. Like, we want you to say my name, for goodness sake, but not tell me use my middle name because it may sound better than my first name and someone's gonna struggle with it. No. It was quite something. The one that I saw isn't as harmful as that one, but the one that I saw and I'm always thinking of on TikTok is a gentleman recommended to use the small white font trick on resumes. So basically the recommendation is copy, know what I'm talking about. You've probably received or reviewed a lot of resumes that have tried that trick. Yeah. For those of you tuning in, basically the tiny white font trick is to copy and paste the job posting into another page on your resume and make it super teeny tiny white font so it's invisible, but it's not really invisible, and it looks like you're trying to manipulate and game the system. So that one went kind of viral. So that one was really bad advice. Terrible.
Yeah, really bad advice. What are your thoughts on the idea of bringing kind of like your whole self to work? I guess this goes back to the transparency factor as well. But how can people feel more comfortable kind of bringing their whole self to the workplace, if that makes sense? Like being themselves, bringing their whole self.
It definitely makes sense. I'm a huge advocate for people being able to bring their entire human to work. That's what
I
I
love
call it. I actually read that book, Bring Your Human to Work, and it was very powerful for me, because many times I think a lot of people hear this, like you leave your situations at the door. You
that.
come into this office, you wipe off all your personal stuff, you leave that out there. You come in here, you do your job, and then when you're leaving, you pick up your personal stuff and you take it back outside. But it's impossible to do that. And people need to be able to feel safe to be who they are in their entirety all day long, because then you create imposters. You create a lot of the mental health issues that people have when you ask them to only be this much of themselves versus being their entire self, right? And so one of the things that I always say is that this is a very deep one for me. I truly believe that if you're working in an organization that does not respect who you are in your entirety and doesn't want you to be yourself, you don't belong there. Number one. You want to be with an organization that is going to embrace you for who you are in your full self, as your entire human. And so I think you should look for organizations that promote psychological safety. These are some of the questions that you can be asking as well when you are going in through the interview process. Like, tell me what it's like. What is your leadership style? What do you like? What don't you like? How do you like to be communicated to? Do you like to tell jokes? You want to ask questions that help people to bring out their human, and then okay, this is an okay place. So I think a lot of times as candidates, we get so caught up in trying to get a job, we don't focus on what we really need to get out of that place.
Right.
So I challenge people to just kind of focus a bit on asking questions that help you to know whether or not the environment you're going into is going to allow you to be yourself. And then once you get in and you start to socialize, then you can determine whether or not it's really a right fit for you. But a lot of times I find during the job hunt, job seekers are so focused on getting a job, we don't focus a lot on what we're bringing into our space.
That's such a good point. I love how you said it. We're not focused on what we're bringing into our space. Because it's not just us going into a space, a workspace. It's about bringing it into our space. I love that. So you raised such a good point, because job seekers are so focused on getting the job. The idea of asking questions in an interview, or at the end of an interview, or whenever you're prompted, is something I've been thinking about a lot lately as well. I think a lot of job seekers are afraid to ask the wrong questions. What do you think about that? Like, when do you think a question crosses from that's appropriate to that's something that could jeopardize your candidacy?
Oh, I guess it's a delicate balance, right? But for the most part, I don't think there are stupid questions, and I don't really think there are wrong questions. I just think it's when to ask the right question, when to ask the question. So my mom would always say to me growing up, Julie, it's not about what you do, it's about you have to focus on the when, you have to focus on your surroundings, It's not about what you say, but how you say and how you make people feel. And so, like, for me, I've always been very focused on that. You have to read the room. Now, for someone with a neurodivergence, it's not always possible to understand how to read the room, because you're focused on just asking your question. And that's where support comes in. So if you're someone with a neurodivergence, like autism or Tourette's, in particular, I would say get someone that can coach you
Mm.
before, so that on the questions that you should ask, and rehearse that the best way that you can, so that you ask the right questions and know when to ask the question. And it's good also if the person who is coaching you is neurotypical, because they'll be able to tell you about the cues. Like working with neurotypical people helps neurodiverse people to become more socialized.
Mm.
So work with someone who has that understanding, that can kind of guide you on the cues of when to ask the question,
Mm-hmm.
and how to phrase the question so that it doesn't come across as offensive, or like, no, we definitely don't want to work with this person. Nothing that raises red flags. So I would say try to get some help, get some support. If it's someone in your family or a friend, or that you hire someone, like integrate to help you do that.
That's a great idea. That feedback is just so important for neurodivergent and neurotypical job seekers. It's always great to get that third party point of view, like total unbiased feedback on how you're presenting, how you're answering questions, and the questions you ask. So
Yes.
those are great tips. Speaking of feedback, Michael was just mentioning in the chat that lack of feedback, I guess, is tough in the job search process, and that it is so tough. But maybe with your background in HR, maybe you can speak to why feedback can't always be given from a compliance standpoint or regulation standpoint.
I think sometimes, I know people want to get feedback, and this is where my ADHD kicks in, because I believe in making managers accountable. So like, if managers are responsible for the recruitment process, I also think that managers should be responsible for giving feedback. And I usually would coach a manager on how to give that feedback, but I would say call back the candidate and just let them know why they're not selected. I think a lot of times we sit these things on HR, or we sit them on the recruiter, where it is that we're just playing a part in a very big picture, which is to help that hiring manager hire the right person for their team. But that doesn't always translate to you, the recruiter, or you, the HR professional, having to give that message at the end of it all. Like, if you make them responsible for letting the candidate know they were successful, and then saying someone from HR or the recruiter is going to get back in contact with you and will give you the details of it. Like, I feel there's so many human elements to the recruitment process that are missing, that we can still implement outside of this, the ATS and all those other things. I just feel it would move a lot better if that feedback was given from the hiring manager and not the recruiter. It comes across, yes, it's third party. Sometimes it's not always possible, because you've interviewed so many candidates. And then again, at best, once you're at shortlisting, you should only be at maybe 3-4 candidates at best. So that should make it a lot easier. Like, I feel like we still have a lot of work to do in terms of making the recruitment process more human, more transparent, more streamlined. And I don't think automating it is the answer every time.
Agreed. And it makes me so upset when I see movement towards automation, like with asynchronous interviewing and things like that. That I feel like totally dehumanizes the process. When it is, as you said, such a human aspect of running a business. So
absolutely. And actually, have you watched Coded Bias on Netflix?
Not yet.
I need to watch Coded Bias.
Okay.
Listen, I watched Coded Bias last weekend, and that has changed my whole. I always thought when you add the ATS system to the recruitment process, I always felt that led to bias, but
Mm.
I didn't know how extreme that bias could be
Oh, wow.
until I watched Coded Bias.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I need to watch it.
You
Everybody tuning
definitely
in needs to watch it.
go watch Coded Bias. Go watch
Wow.
Coded Bias, definitely. Like that, we have so much work to do, and I am so glad for people like Joy, who have really voiced this concern for everyone, in
Mm.
particular for people of color, and that this bias is created in the ATS system and in every possible system. And the scary thing about it is that because that artificial intelligence grows and develops on its own
Mm.
based on the input that it is getting from people who keep feeding into it,
Right.
it goes on its own tangents and creates its own things. And
Mm.
therefore, it makes the whole process even more biased and less transparent than we want it to be.
That's so true. Like if AI and machine learning can run wild,
Yes.
it will become a beast, really, and difficult, if not impossible, to manage. So the whole like concept of ethics in AI, ethics in machine learning is vital as well. Um, so yeah, absolutely. So I got to watch that. Coded
Yeah.
Bias. Got
Coded
to watch
Bias,
it.
Netflix.
Coded Bias on Netflix.
Hmm.
Okay, let's see. Michael's popping in here. Sometimes interviewers get stuck on something you said, like I programmed earlier in my career, and you said you sound like a programmer even though you had 20 years of project management. Oh, interesting, Michael. So I guess what Michael's saying, Julie, is that some interviewers might kind of fixate on one thing that you say about your career.
Hmm.
How do you see that in interviewing, like, and how would interviewers try and move away from that?
I think that's part of, you'd have to try to steer them away from it.
Ah.
Even though they may focus on it, but you say, but this does not define me. Like,
Mm.
not all there is to me. And
Mm.
again, it's about how you sell yourself. And I
Mm.
know whether we are neurodivergent or neurotypical, one of the things we all struggle with is selling ourselves. That
Right.
value proposition that we put in our resume, on our LinkedIn profile, that about us. A lot of us struggle then to interpret that verbally.
Right.
It's even harder for someone who has a neurodivergence to do that. But you have to find ways to steer the conversation in such a way that you say, well, yeah, that's just a part of who I am, or who I am.
Mm.
Yeah, but it's not the sum of who I am. Here are the other things that I've done of recent. And
Mm.
this is where I add value. So you kind of have to upsell yourself.
That makes sense. And probably it goes back to that mindset again, as you noted, of being so concerned about getting the job that maybe sometimes you don't like as an interviewee, as a job seeker, we don't really challenge things
Yes.
that we've heard the interviewers say,
Mm-hmm.
because we just don't want to say the wrong thing.
Same.
it's
Exactly.
it's tough, but that's a great point that you brought up, that we have to steer the interviewer ourselves. We have to advocate for
Yes,
ourselves in the interview.
exactly, because you're going in there to sell yourself,
Mm-hmm.
your services, and say why this person should hire you. And so as you do that, you have to be able to articulate your resume, your experience, whether that's work experience, but also your life experience, because all of these things are going to add to the culture of the organization. You're
Mm-hmm.
there to help the culture thrive,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not stay stagnant. So you need to find ways within the interview process. And this is why I always say, this is what I always say to clients, like, the interview process is a two-way street.
Yes.
Yes, they've called you in for an interview, but you've decided to go. Now, when you get into that interview, they're interviewing you to determine whether or not they're going to hire you, but you're also adding to that conversation to say whether or not you want to be considered for that position. I've had clients walk out after and go like, no way I want to work here. and get the offer and be like,
Pass.
sorry, Julie, that's a hard pass. And then you have to give feedback to the organization as to why the person didn't choose them. So
that must feel kind of good though, to be on that end, giving the feedback.
It does. It really does. Like, people go like, does that actually happen? But it does. It does.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Michael's asking as well, how can you tell when they never really wanted to pick you, even though you got the interview? That's tough. How would you uncover that?
Yeah, like, that's like they've created a bias up front. So then what was the purpose of interviewing you in the first place?
Yeah.
I don't think it's about numbers. That's for sure. I have this problem like here. Okay, so like here in Barbados, this is like a typical thing that happens where the government may put out a role and say they're recruiting for a role, but really and truthfully, they're not recruiting for a role. Like, they've already picked someone for that job.
Right.
Just, you know that they're going through something in the background, or they're just putting it out there because they have to. Now, when an organization does that, then I think that they have to be very careful,
right,
about them bringing people through the interview process. I'm not saying that it's not impossible. I've seen things like that happen here, and like, I've seen that happen in some instances where people put jobs out, but really and truthfully, they've already decided that who they're gonna hire, but they're just going through a formality. But how would you determine that as a candidate is a hard one. Like, you'd have to know the history of the organization, or know the experiences that other people have had. But this is where doing your homework matters.
Right.
So like, when you are when you are out there as a job seeker, you are also seeking to understand the organizations that you're looking to work with. What is their culture like? Find people there who you can follow on LinkedIn, ask questions. Like, you've really got to probe and do your homework. And once you've done that, then these kind of things you'll be able to kind of see up front and figure out. And then you determine whether or not that's somewhere that a process that you want to go through, knowing that you're not going to be chosen.
Right. So it's still challenging, because those organizations would probably be pretty good at hiding.
Well, like as I said, for sure, we know when it's happening. When we see certain jobs here,
right,
in Barbados that are being advertised, we know, okay, doesn't make no sense applying for that. That is just a formality.
Right. What a shame.
Again, we're a small island.
Well, I mean, it's not just like a Barbados thing. Definitely that happens. Like, I've seen it happen when I was in corporate as well. It's like, we have to publicly post this.
Exactly.
Sorry. So yeah, it's a shame.
Yeah, it is.
So I wanted to talk to you about the idea you have, or the concept that you were talking, or you mentioned to me before, about approaching recruiting like a sport talent coach. That really was super intriguing. So you like to encourage recruiters to approach recruiting as like being a sports coach or talent coach. How would we flip this for the job seeker to kind of see job seeking as being an athlete?
So I say this, like, there are some athletes who know which football team they want to go on, which basketball team they want to be a part of. Like, athletes already know these things. They know they want to run for their country, or they know they want to play whatever sport for whatever team. A talent scout then comes in and they do their best to make it happen, right? For you as a job seeker, like one of the questions I would always ask, like, is what are the top 3 organizations that you would ever want to work at? And if you know the top 3 organizations that you want to work at, focus on them alone. Do your homework, get to know the organization. And here's where you now can add that value. If you see gaps in things that the organization is doing, you can put yourself out there, connect with the people, whether it's a hiring manager or someone from HR, someone from talent, or even if you know the recruiter who recruits for that organization, and say, look, I've done my homework and I recognize that this particular organization that's on my top 3 list has these particular gaps. I can fill these gaps through this role. Here's a sample of the role that I'm thinking of that they need. Would you go forward and put this role into them, put a word in for me for this role? Or go directly to the organization and say, look, based on what I've seen in the news, on your website, based on conversations I've had with people who are working in your organization, I understand that these are some challenges that you are having. Here's what I bring to the table. This is a role that I think that you need. This is what I think the role looks like. Take a look at it. Let me know what you think.
So approaching them, even if the role isn't posted, even if the role doesn't exist. And then pitching yourself for it.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, organizations don't know everything. They don't know everything they need. They just know what they want in the moment. Right. Or as they are preparing to build for the future, whether it's their 5-year plan or their 10-year plan, but they haven't quite put it in place yet. So not every organization is looking at their roles of the future, like for the next 5 years, right? But if you are keenly interested in working for this particular organization, do your homework. If it's a role they don't know they need yet, and you can get in by selling that role, you win every time.
Oh, I love that. I guess like logically the role needs to exist. Otherwise, why would there be those gaps, right?
Exactly. You have those gaps because you don't have me.
Right.
And this role.
Yeah, I love it. I love how bold that is, but it's so logical. Like I love that. Love that. So we are approaching the top of the hour. So if anybody has any final questions for Julie, please do make sure to get them in the chat. So with HR Sound Off podcast, what do you have on the horizon that's really exciting for your podcast?
So I recently took my podcast live to YouTube.
Yes.
So I do that once a month, and I have to thank you for that, because you were my first YouTube live.
I was the very, oh yes, I remember. I was the very first.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
You were my very first. And so every month now I do one live session where I have conversations like on a panel with different people. I actually had the last one yesterday.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, yesterday. So we talked about gig HR and the gig economy. But I have next month, I have a really great conversation coming up with Galen Emmanuel and Gethin Nadin. And we're going to be talking about building intentional cultures and why it's important for organizations to build intentional cultures. So more than just talking about your values, and you have a set of values that you put up on the wall in your organization, but do you really live by those values? And what does it really mean to have an intentional company culture? And this one was inspired by GitHub.
Oh, really? Yeah. From GitHub? And why GitHub?
Because I recently read their culture code and I fell in love with it. And it was a conversation that I wanted to have. And I was like, two great people who I know who are so passionate about culture, if nobody else, is Galen, Emmanuel, and Gethin. They are both very passionate about company culture and creating great and meaningful and purposeful and intentional cultures.
Yes.
It's what they talk about all day long. And it's going to be a very interesting conversation. First time I'm actually having a panel discussion with two men.
Okay.
Two of my favorite people.
That's
so I'm looking forward to that conversation. Yes. So
and I'm sorry, when is that one coming up?
That is coming up on the 20th of May.
20th of May. I will definitely tune into that. I recently subscribed to Galen's YouTube channel.
Oh.
And yeah, and his name actually came up when I was on HR Social Hour with Wendy and John, because we were talking about improv, and Galen's a big improv.
He is.
Yeah, performer.
Galen got me through lockdown. Oh my gosh. With his improv.
Oh,
yes. He has. Are you following him on Instagram?
We just connected on Instagram, so I need to go.
So you gotta go back a little bit through his Instagram feed, but like during lockdown, he did some really hilarious improv stuff. But he had one that just sticks with me forevermore, which was choose your lockdown avatar. So you know, like how you have video games where you have the different characters and you see them kind of like moving to the left of He did like several of those. And I was like, oh my Lord, this man is trying to kill me. It was hilarious.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. I will definitely check that out. And Galen, if you see me hearting something that's like years old, I'm not stalking you. Julie told me to look.
I did. He'll know it was me.
Good. And Michael just wanted to let you know, his mother-in-law used the strategy you were talking about, like, hey, here's a gap, hire me, and it worked. Yeah. And he also says that he's really enjoyed this conversation. So have I.
Thank you.
This has been fantastic. And we've covered so many different topics. So exciting stuff on your podcast. Where else? Well, first of all, where can people tune into your podcast?
So you can find my podcast pretty much anywhere. Spotify, Apple, Google, pretty much anywhere. SoundCloud, Castbox, yes. So you can find my my podcast there, HR Sound Off, Demystifying HR, One Misconception at a Time.
Love it.
That's where you can find me.
Love it. And where else can people follow you on the interwebs?
LinkedIn. I live on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn all day, every day. That's where I find my clients. So yeah, LinkedIn, and Instagram.
And speaking of clients, who are you? Who is your like ideal client right now?
All HR professionals, anyone in the HR space that is struggling in their career, trying to figure out if they want to stay in HR, just want to build and develop their career. I create safe places for HR professionals to lean in, grow, and thrive. That's what I do.
I love it. Hence, in the brackets, HR for HR.
HR for HR, yes. I make it abundantly obvious because you can no longer ask, where is the HR for HR? I'm right here.
I love it. I love it. Have you claimed that hashtag HR for HR?
I have not. I'm going to. Yes, I have to do it.
Yes, absolutely.
I haven't done it as yet.
And it will travel with you everywhere. LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram.
Yes.
So
yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Julie, for all of the insights you've shared today around job searching as a neurodivergent professional, well-being, conducting your job search like an athlete. Like we've talked about it all tonight. I really appreciate you joining me and sharing all your insights. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we'll see you next Thursday. Take care.
Bye.